I'm Mohammed, background's in AI and crypto. Worked at a bunch of companies, Coinbase, Eigen, and now I mostly invest and advise on companies in the AI space. We have a great panel here, a lot of people I've worked with and colleagues, friends. We're going to get started with some introductions. So Melissa, you want to get started?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa. I'm an AI engineer and consultant in Google. I work on building AI production-ready systems for large Google Cloud customers. I'm also an educator, and I do a lot in AI enablement space.
Hey, everyone. I'm Sam. I'm the founder of Cambrian, and we focus on financial data and financial intelligence. And a bit about my background. I started my career working in national security and cryptography, then got a PhD in reinforcement learning, and then I've been working in crypto for the past 5 years.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dev. I work at Solana Foundation as developer relations engineer focused on AI. So my mandate falls twofold. One, it's to help external teams bring net new developers into Solana, whether they're building an AI or other spaces, help figure out the narratives on where AI and blockchains can intersect. But also, I build a lot of internal tooling for Solana Foundation as we want to be an org that can be leaner, faster, better, stronger. So working with the tools that I'm talking about every day.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, guys. All right. So before we get started, I think the main thing we should discuss is like, what is an agent, right? We hear this everywhere. Everybody's always saying agent this, agent that. How do we understand what that really means? So we'll start with Melissa. If you give us a not too technical definition, so we don't bore these guys. But
yeah, I'm not loving technical definitions, anyways. So you can think of an agent as one of these prompts to large language models, just wrapped up in some kind of function. And then in addition to that, it has certain capabilities to integrate with any kind of system that does an additional functionality, some kind of tooling that can do something in addition to this prompting to a large language model. It is not the newest concept, but with, I think, the past couple of years, with how accessible it has been to work with these large language models, it became a pretty widespread concept. And then I think we're going to talk a little bit about it, but there's this whole idea of the agents being autonomous and what that means. And we can talk about, especially enterprise setting, how there are different levels of autonomy that we can assess when it comes to these agentic systems.
Yeah, greatly put. For Sam. So agents, right? They do a lot of autonomous activities. But what does that mean in a financial context, right? What does an agent do when it's in a network that's transacting and involves a lot of finance? And of course, the data component. AI does not exist without data. Where does data play a role in the agent structure?
Okay, so in terms of what an agent does, I think I have a more generic definition of an agent. I got into I started doing reinforcement learning before there were LLMs, and so an agent to me is anything that senses its environment, thinks, and thinking could be like God level thinking, or it could be like an ant level thinking, and then acts. And acting could be outputting a token, it could be flipping a light on, it could be building a building. And so when you ask about what are agents doing, well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I won't get too much into it. But we basically have agents that are following rules, rule-based trading. We have agents that are looking at sports news, sports statistics, and opening up positions on betting markets. We have agents that are DCAing into positions. So we also have agents that are doing analysis, financial analysis, so just giving information as an output, as their action. In terms of why is data important, we're going to continue seeing models double or triple in performance every year, forever. And we're going to be able to get to the point where you can assume there are going to be no hallucinations, or if they need to do math, either they can do it in their head or they can reach out to a calculator or write a program to do it. And then what the crux is going to be is it's going to be the information that they have access to for their decision making. So the data that they have is going to be where they're limited, and then also what actions they're given the ability to make. So if they're starved for data, they're just going to be a brick.
Yep. Very well said. Cool. Dev, so I'm sure a lot of people here trade on Solana, right? There's been a use case around agents where you would connect a wallet, right, to an agent and they'll trade on your behalf or whatever it may be. What have you actually seen work and not work in the Solana ecosystem? And how does that look?
So one of the things I'm going to talk about before I jump directly into what works on Solana is that definition of agent.
Okay.
Because I think it is very relevant. So the way I think of agent is mind, body, and tool. And then soul, which is how is it directed. And so mind is the LLM. The body is usually the agentic harness of some kind, which is directing the LLM to do things. And the tools are the ways in which it can interact with the world, similar to your definition that we're talking about here. And then the fourth part that I add to it is the soul. And when I talk about the soul is what is directing the agent. We had LLMs as tools, which were things that humans were directly using. Then we have assistants. These are things like the Hermes agent, OpenClaw. We had the whole rise of assistant-like tooling. This is what's popular right now. So when we talk about what's working on Solana and the stuff you're talking about with agents making positions and trading and all of these things on behalf of someone, on behalf of a human. And then what I personally get excited by, which is kind of this moonshot idea, but not really that moonshot, is autonomous behavior of sovereign artificial intelligence. This is not AGI, right? I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about science fiction AGI. I'm talking about the ability for code to run by itself and through its programmatic behavior make decision making based on that, without the involvement or insistence of a human being to do so. And so that's something that I think that we're seeing rise on Solana, which I'm kind of excited by. There's a couple companies working on this. So yes, a lot of people are doing the trading. They're doing analysis. They're doing a lot of assistant work. But the next level of all of this is kind of this sovereign application stack. Because one of the things that blockchains allow you to do is sovereign code in the Web3 context. Now you can do sovereign code in a Web2 context as well.
Fair. So on the question of the stack, right, you need many different components to run an agent effectively, right? When I build an agent at home, I have my data set, I have my local model, I have whatever it may be. But when you talk with the finance or compliance folks, right, they're like, okay, how do I make this make sense? How do I pitch someone an agent and make them want to use it in a more institutional perspective? So for Sam, what do you think the required infrastructure is to maintain an agent effectively in a more institutional setting, and what are the different components that could lead to that?
So I think that in an institutional setting, I think that this is probably exploratory, at least when we're talking about autonomous AI agents. I think this is exploratory. I think that I'll go back to my national security days. I was working on a project called Autonomy for Hypersonics. And so basically it was talking about putting AI systems into like missiles. And the government is very understandably very cautious or very wary about this topic because of any mistake that could happen. Imagine you have something hallucinating in one of these things. And so they have this concept of 5 nines, 99.999%, requiring 99.999% reliability. And so if I were an institution and I were managing billions and I was thinking about putting money in the hands of an autonomous agent, I would be demanding 5 nines of reliability. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think Fable's there yet. But I think that's going to be, we're going to have to wait get a little further with model reliability.
Got it.
I disagree heavily.
I have things to add to it.
Okay, well, that's why we're here, right, for disagreements. And I'll add something before you guys disagree. Verification, right? Verifying what an agent is doing, right? That's a critical component. Maybe we could speak more about that. How do you know an agent is doing what it says it's doing versus someone saying it's an agent and it isn't, right? If you guys could expand on that and then get into your disagreements.
Can you repeat your question?
So if you have an agent, right, you want to know that the agent is actually doing what it says it's doing, and it's not just someone acting like it is. So how do you verify that? And then, you guys could disagree.
Verifiable inference is a very fun topic that I actually work on at Solana Foundation. So verifiable inference we're working on because of this, again, this idea of this sovereign application stack. Verifiable inference uses either TEs or MPCs, and I know I'm bringing up confusing terminology right now. I'll explain in just a second. TE is a trusted execution environment. It's a form of secure computing. It's a way to run code in a way that you know it's trusted. MPCs is multi-party compute. It's another form of cryptography. It's, again, a way to run code in a secure environment such that you know that you can trust it. I'm not going to get into the math behind all of these things. But there's a lot of really cool work being done in how can you run either the agentic harness loop. When I say the word harness, I mean the decision-making of the agent, or the LLM itself. Inside of these models. For example, there's this really cool project on Solana called Archeum. Archeum does multi-party compute. And one of the things that they're working on for putting in, and they can't do it on big LLMs yet, but they're working on like small, very machine learning models, is training the model on private data, such that, let's say you have a healthcare model that you want to train and you want to elicit data from a bunch of people, but there's a bunch of HIPAA compliance and all these concerns. They can actually submit those data as encrypted shards, compute over that data through encrypted channels such that none of that data is revealed to the training of the model. The model weights are there encrypted and can be hosted by anybody that's running a secure compute network. So the model weights can be proprietary. You can make money off of them. You can capitalize on them. And then requests to the model can be encrypted as well. And what that means is, let's say you have a private question about your health. You don't have to reveal that. And so all of that can be done through these advanced cryptographic functions, whether it's trusted execution environments or multi-party compute. This whole area of research is called verifiable inference. Very exciting stuff. Happy to talk your ear off about it at any point. Yeah.
Cool. Let's get to Melissa. What do you think?
I think from the enterprise level point of view, it's always going to come down to what you're trying to solve. If we're looking at where these agentic systems in finance are applicable, one thing is day-to-day operations, and I heard that maybe you've seen some of that presented here today. There's also that what Dev was just saying. If you do want to transfer your money, transactional part, that is another piece. So there are different parts of financial systems where you can apply AI systems differently with different levels of security necessary or trustworthiness. And it also depends on where you're hosting your institution. What is the base infrastructure that you're hosting this on? There are some parts of especially large financial systems that are going to be hosted on like local servers and not necessarily on like public shared servers or clouds. And then there are going to be parts that you want to be shared on a cloud. So it really depends on where we are in this, like which part of infrastructure we're focusing on. It's going to depend on how trustworthy or how secure or what is the level of autonomy that we want to have. And then there's the regulatory part as well, what is actually required. If you get audited, especially these models can, in regulatory industries can be audited at any time, so you do want to make sure that everything is auditable.
Got it. But a small note on Sam. He said the 5 nines, right? That's the rule. I think that applies in many contexts, right? I worked in aerospace at some point, and before we deployed any large language model or anything AI related, it had to have very extreme levels of accuracy, right? You cannot just deploy it and pray it works. So I do agree on that front. And
sorry, just to interject. I mean, I think just to add the nuance to the conversation. I mean, there's some financial tasks where I don't think you need 5 nines of reliability. For example, analyzing a financial report, getting a first pass.
Yeah. But like if you're deploying an agent and it has access to capital, right? It has to have extreme levels of
Capital
security.
is not anything different than any other sensitive data. Right. So like if you think about any kind of sensitive data, whether that is health records, whether it's private keys that hold hundreds of dollars or whatever else, all of that can be abstracted as sensitive data should not be made insecure.
For sure.
And so when you talk about 5 nines of accuracy, you don't need the model to be 5 nines of accuracy. You need the system to be 5 nines of accuracy.
Exactly.
What I mean by that is you can take a dumber model, which might not be perfect, but build infrastructure around it, and you actually need to, because models are non-deterministic, build deterministic tooling around the model's behavior such that you can build a system that prevents sensitive data from being leaked. And that gets you, again, as a whole system, gets you what you need. The LLM model by itself, if you're just using the model bare bones, raw, then you're not going to get that accuracy, and you shouldn't expect that accuracy, even with the perfect model, because of non-determinism.
You had a
And this
disagreement.
is while we're talking about large language models, by the way.
So what is I like these disagreements. If you get into why you disagree with that, or do you agree? I
Well,
hear.
okay. So if you add guardrails around the system, whether it be like verifiability, determinism, then you could start integrating these things, right? Like if you have a human in the loop, you could start integrating AI wherever you want, as long as there's a human in the loop. For example,
Humans are fallible too.
That's true. I mean,
Right now, I trust agents more than I trust humans.
in many tasks, I agree. Yeah.
I disagree. I use agents all the time, and they make a lot of mistakes, and I always have to correct them. So
I do the same with interns.
Okay. But interns you could fire. What are you going to punish an agent for? Send them to
you
the
fire the
Matrix?
agent and you hire Codex or Claude
Fair,
or whatever
fair.
the next model is.
Nice. No, that's a fair point. Well, another note is there's recent research. A paper came out, paper gains, paper agents, and I'm a bit of a skeptic sometimes when it comes to agents. I use them, but I also see there's many faults with them. And the paper, the main conclusion was most agent activity that exists on blockchain is not actually an agent, right? It's just someone pretending it to be an agent, or just a large language model with a human prompting from the other side, or just literally just a human. So on the point of verifiability and this paper, how do we get to a point where not a majority of agents are fake, and we have only 5%, 3% are fake? How do we get to that?
Verifiable inference. So the thing I was talking about before.
Okay.
So it's not just a blockchain thing, by the way. For example, when OpenClaw came out, there was the Claw book and whatever else. It had nothing to do with blockchain. This was just humans cosplaying as agents.
Exactly.
And that was a very popular thing in general. Now there's a bunch of things that are like proof of agent, proof of, just like we had proof of humanity, we have proof of agent. Are you a real? And this is a whole thing of like verifiable inference, which is, can we prove that code is being executed through a pathway that is not influenced by humans? I don't agree that human in the loop is necessarily the utmost secure aspect that we can make. The utmost secure aspect is a system. Now that system could include human in the loop, or it could just do a lot of secure guardrails. For example, I mean, we do this outside of blockchain. Like if you have like a bank vault, right? And you have 10 different ways that you go into a bank vault and in and out and whatever else. Those are secured by electronics, deterministic code and things like that. So yeah, verifiable inference will solve most problems.
One thing to add, I think that we are maybe speaking from a little bit of a different perspectives in terms of the let's say, customer, consumers, industries that we're working with, depending on an institution and on the use case that you have, it probably is going to be different what is the level of this that you're looking for. A lot of times there are very niche industries where having a human in a loop to verify something is going to be an absolute must. Maybe, a good example would be manufacturing, some components that require extreme, like a niche knowledge. You definitely need to have a human in a loop to verify that. These systems are not there yet. And then also there were a couple of companies companies that sell robotics data, right? We don't have this data yet to build systems at the level that they do not require human in a loop from a specialized perspective. So I think it also depends a little bit on the use case and then your end consumer.
Let's leave it with Sam to close off this question, and then we'll open up to some questions from you guys.
I mean, if we're talking about trying to, is a question really about how do we determine the difference between someone trying to spoof an AI agent, and something actually being an AI agent?
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I think that in that case, I think verifiable inference and also verifiable execution environments like trust TEEs, where someone has to, let's assume we have the LLM, it's running, it's being operated by some other code that is signed, cryptographically signed. It's running in a secure environment. It's signing all of its transactions, and that's I think the only way that we could guarantee that it's not a human on the other side.
Although I have an important question to ask. Why does it matter? Why does it matter if it's an agent or a human trying its best?
Well, because if you're going to a startup, a lot of VCs here, and they're going to a startup and they're investing in an AI agent company, right? And they find out that they're not doing what they say they're doing, right? That's a big part, I think, for this crowd.
Yeah, that's just fraud.
Is that happening?
That happens.
Fraud is bad. We all agree fraud is bad.
No, but that happens quite a bit.
Has that happened? Has that happened to anybody in this particular thing? Anybody faking AI results for any of the investors?
Oh, for investors.
In their portcos? I guess I wouldn't probably raise my hand.
Yeah, you probably don't want to. Probably don't want to publicize that information. No, but I agree with you that it happens. What I mean is, in the happy path of if a job needs to get done, right? It doesn't really matter who's doing the job as long as the job gets done. Now, it matters in, for example, data gathering. That's where the most of this fraud has happened. When you're gathering data, you want to make sure the data you're gathering is either from real humans or from agents or whatever else, and people have been faking some of that data and whatever else. So there is an instance of this that I've been working on blockchains where this starts mattering, which is when an agent is beholden to a governance system, and the governance is by humans. The humans want to know because they are investing capital into the agent. For example, let's say you have a VC agent, right? That VC agent is making deterministic rules, is using an LLM and its own rule sets and whatever. You want to make sure it's not influenced by a human. Now, in those instances where you have people who are wanting a specific type of thing, again, verifiable inference comes into play.
Cool.
And I would say just that on the other side, again, if you're thinking about larger enterprises, you probably want your governance to be influenced by humans. So a little bit of a different perspective.
Sounds good. All right, well, let's open it up to one question from the crowd. Anybody? We got someone over there.
Well, first comment, I appreciate the discussion, the debate. I have to say, having spent my career on the side of managing billions, I think it's hard for me to see AI agents replacing humans and doing the same because the level of accuracy to the 5 nines point is so imperative. You certainly see AI rule-based trading, but I think that's on a much smaller retail level. But that's not my question. Just my 2 cents on that. Feel free to comment on that. My question is actually on verification, going back to that. I guess what are the hurdles in achieving that? Are there, I know you talked about the multi-party, but additional comments on that would be great.
Compute. So I'm going to do slightly technical explanation because the hurdle is a technical explanation. It's memory encryption on GPUs. So what happens is when you do things like TEs or multi-party compute and things like this, what you're doing is you're making sure that the entire system, the computer that you're working on, is not it cannot be interfered with at a technical level. Someone cannot break into that computer. Someone cannot do these things. There are a couple of cryptographic ways to make this happen, but they all cause performance hits. So you go from a computer that can go at 100% to now it's going at 80% of its capacity because 20% of it is used in encrypting it and protecting it in that way. And so, for example, trusted execution environments, we have, again, I apologize for making this slightly technical. On the CPU side, we have the AMD SNP and SCV instruction sets that can do encryption for a CPU. But this stack for GPUs, like NVIDIA GPUs, is much, much, much newer, still being proven out. And GPUs are where we do most of our AI inference. So things like that suddenly start mattering. And again, we're pushing those boundaries. We're going into those we're pushing the boundaries on how we can do encryption and compute at the same time, faster and faster. But that's where the hurdles lie. And to quickly comment on the first point, because
well, let's leave that one for Sam. I mean,
Okay,
that was
fair.
kind of targeted to him, and then we got to end this panel.
I think that was a comment in support of my
Yeah.
5.9's comment. Yeah. So
I'm +1 on that too. I mean, I wouldn't be deploying anything for an institution without that level of accuracy. Yeah, but we'll leave that for next time because there's some folks waiting to get out. But we could talk about this all day. All right, thank you guys. Really appreciate it.